everyone, Iris here. Today I wanted to talk about how to explain employment gaps in your resume and to employers when you're looking for a new job. The reality of life is that life happens, and a lot of people take time off work to either raise children, travel the world, because they've been laid off, or to care for a sick relative. So how do you explain this to a future employer when looking for a new job, and how do you cover this gap on your resume? So here are my recommendations on how I think it's best to explain employment gaps in your resume and explain them during a job interview. Now, my approach is to always be honest. So let's talk about some ways you can do that. My first tip is just that. Be honest and explain it. You'll want to explain to future employers and on your resume why you have this gap. So whether it's a year or 2 years, it's important to write it into your resume because the truth is that the truth sometimes comes out. So my first tip is just that. Be honest and explain it. The best way to explain it on your resume is to simply write it in. I've always appreciated on a resume when it's explained very clearly with dates and a job title, whether that job title is time off to care for a sick relative or raising children, and the dates are right next to it. So I'm aware that I know you took time off and it's a discussion topic when you come in for an interview or when I talk to you about it on the phone. I appreciate the humanness to it as well. It gives me a way to relate to the candidate, and it really helps me to understand them on a different level. So like I said, recruiters and hiring managers will appreciate the honesty. So that's a way that you can put it on your resume just as part of your work experience. And then when you explain it in an in-person interview, be very clear and be very concise and don't go into too much detail. So, if you were, for example, a stay-at-home mom at the time, it's okay to say, hey, I took some time off to raise my children and now I'm ready to really jump back in. And that's okay. You can leave it at that. You don't have to explain anymore. Or if it's, I took time off to care for a sick relative and we have now found them a caregiver and they're doing much better, that's great too. You'll want to, like I said, be honest and be very clear and concise. My second tip for you is to explain it on your cover letter. Cover letters are like sprinkles on top of your resume cupcake. So it's a great place to really go into more detail about what's on your resume. So if there is a large gap, that's a great place to really explain it in a little bit more detail. Not too much detail, but it's a great time to say, I took time off and now I'm ready to jump back in and do this. This will help your future employer understand that you took some time off for a reason and you're ready to come back into the workforce. Like I said, it's just a great area to really go into just a little bit more detail and really explain why there's a gap in your employment, especially if you're not including it on your resume. If you took time off because you were laid off and didn't really have a choice, then I think a great way to explain it on your cover letter would be to say that you were let go due to X and Y reason, and that now you're being picky about the new job that you want, and so you're taking an extended period of time off to really figure out what that is and explore some different opportunities. Life happens, be honest, and a cover letter is a great way to go into a little bit more detail. Another thing you can do during a gap in employment is to not do nothing. If you were laid off or fired, or even if you are raising children or taking care of a sick relative, there's always something you could be doing related to your field, whether that's reading up on some books or taking a class here and there when you have some extra time, or networking, or still meeting up for coffee with different people so that you can still talk about what you love to do. So I would highly recommend that you don't do nothing if at all possible during that time, because what it does is it'll just help you explain the gap a little bit better. You can say, I was a stay-at-home mom, but I have kept up on all the technology and taken classes to do X and Y, and I'm confident I can jump back in. I'd really recommend that you try your hardest to not be stagnant and try to keep yourself up in your field. This shouldn't feel like work. It should feel like something you're doing because you're simply just interested in it. Another thing that I cannot stress enough is that I want you to make sure that employers know that you're ready to come back into the workforce. The question on every employer and interviewer's mind is going to be, Has this been resolved? Are you really ready to come back? Is the travel bug out of your system? Is the sick relative okay? So you'll want to make sure that you let them know that you are ready to come back in, it's all been resolved, and you're excited to jump back into the workforce. This will just give the employer reassurance that you are ready to come back and that you are being truthful about that gap in your employment. My last tip for you is to be prepared and be confident. There's nothing worse than being asked, hey, I see that you have a 2-year gap in your resume. Why is that? And stuttering through the entire answer. It just makes you sound unprofessional, unprepared, and not very confident, and could even make you sound like you're lying. Be prepared for the question. Know that the employer is likely going to ask you about it, and be prepared with an answer that's very brief and honest. Even practice how you're going to answer it so that you're not caught off guard when the topic comes up. So those are my tips. Like I said, honesty is the best policy. If you're interviewing at an employer that doesn't seem to really understand why you would need to have taken that gap, you probably don't really want to work for them anyway. Be honest, be truthful with yourself, put the gap on your resume, don't try and hide it. And the likelihood is that the employer or the recruiter, the hiring manager, they will understand because they've likely taken time off as well. Something that I've experienced, for example, is a candidate came in and they had a 2-year gap on their resume, and I was asking them, how come you took this time off? You haven't worked for about 2 years. Explain that to me a little bit. And they told me they were laid off from their previous job and they took it as an opportunity to travel the world. It was something they had always wanted to do. They're so excited and glad that they did it. It gave them new perspective, and now they're ready to jump back in. And I loved that candidate's answer because, one, we ended up talking about all the places he traveled to, and two, it was honest. He probably grew a lot because of it and was really ready to jump back in. So I hope this helped you kind of figure out how to explain a gap in employment to a future employer when you're looking for a new job. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more videos and content like this coming your way. Thanks so much, and see you in a bit.